Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1121 Amazon vs Crusader. While Seth was busy headhunting, the stadium didn't wait for his return. In the arena, the last fight of the quarterfinals had already begun. On one side was Leica, who had become the favorite of the tournament thanks to Nem's loss, in her full combat attire. Her opponent was the holy cannoneer from Earth, the human gun turret Iblin Godfrey. He too, didn't waste time with the Gatling gun and went directly for the high-caliber machine gun. The roar of gunfire filled the arena, under the golden dome covering the battlefield. Even Leica was forced to evade and shield against his onslaught. "That's what she gets for accepting the holy duel," Brock, the master of the Boulder Guild, commented on the stands. The Crusader had requested the duel right in the beginning and the Amazon had agreed because she was interested in the fight. "Don't be so dismissive. It's only been a few minutes since the fight started. I'm sure she has another ace up her sleeve," Galwell, the leader of Gamma Resistance, reminded him. Although she seemed to be at a disadvantage now, it didn't mean that it would stay that way. "Ha! You are just denying the truth because you bet on her," the other taunted him friendly. After their initial small rivalry about their people, they had hit it off once it was clear neither of their own would make it far in the tournament. They had spent the past days, watching the fights together with their guild members in a booth they reserved together. The two fell silent when a sonic boom erupted from the arena, overshadowing the gunfire. Their heads snapped back to the arena in synchronicity to see that Leica's spear had finally clashed against the Crusader's shield. Sparks spewed at the place they met, cracks could be seen spreading in the air. The holy barrier was being damaged, however. Leica's spear started slipping off the membrane, unable to fully break or penetrate it. Despite the shield that quickly rose to protect her, there was a tiny opening in her guard, which the serious knight used without hesitation. The sonic boom was followed by the crack of a single shot. Like tracer ammunition, it left a bright streak of light in the air like a laser beam. It pierced the Amazon's torso cleanly, but only had enough energy to fall outside the arena, once it had drilled through her. "What kind of skill was that?" Brock mumbled, shocked. He didn't know a lot about cannoneers, but this looked similar to high-grade archer skills. Something like penetrating shot or power arrow. It was the first time Iblin had used an actual, perceivable skill with his firearms. In the arena, Leica stared at the hole in her chest. Blood dripped from her lips, as her eyes were glued to the bloody hole in her hardened leather harness. "Well fought," she complimented her opponent without any regret. Her gaze lost its light and she started vanishing from the arena. "Say what? Leica lost? But I was only gone for like 10 minutes. Seth exclaimed minutes after returning to their booth. He just came back from his conversation with Nam. When he noticed that the arena was being repaired, he asked what happened, only for his friends to explain to him that he missed the last match of the quarterfinals. And even more shocking, that their Leica was the one eliminated. It was hard to believe the powerful Amazon would lose twice in their tournament. It became more believable when they told him that she had accepted the sacred duel from the beginning. At this point, the two favorites of the tournament were actually eliminated during the quarterfinals. The semi-finals would be held with 3 of the original winners and 1 returnee. This was an outcome few would have anticipated. "Well, at least I'm in time for the start of the semi-finals. How are our preparation for that coming along?" he asked Mary and Lena about the main act of the day. "Yes. The golems are in position and we sent a few more scouts in the surrounding mountains. We also informed our allies and mercenaries about the proceedings," Mary answered. "Everything is ready for the grand welcome." Seth nodded. Now all they had to do was wait for the grand tournament, which had been degraded to a secondary climax, to end and to see what their enemy had prepared for them. "Shouldn't we go all out and crush them? If we show the world what we can do, I'm sure nobody will pick a fight with us anymore," Finn asserted, still a little unhappy about their plan. "And Steel Python's show? You forgot these guys are just the cultivators working with demons and losers from the scene. We have to stay vigilant because of Spacia," Phaenis commented roughly, but unexpectedly perceptive. Although her words were a little rough, she clearly pointed out the crux of the matter. Forces like Spacia or Krina wouldn't get scared by their strength, they would just prepare better. Minasmar decided to only use their new and secondary powers, leaving the stage to Python. If they only revealed what was necessary to deal with the situation, the true mastermind behind it all would underestimate them. "What did you call it again? Marinating the chicken to eat the tiger, or something like that." In turn, they would have more leeway to react to attacks and buy more time to grow stronger. The day was not young anymore, but it was still bright outside. The sun was still some distance away from the mountains in the west. The clouds that had covered the sky from time to time on the previous tournament day were gone. The sun shone down on the final 3 matches of the tournament. Welcome back from the break everyone, and welcome to the semi-finals of the Pythian Games Martial Tournament. Just 4 contestants remain. I probably don't have to repeat it for you, but for formality's sake. Following the traditional tournament style, the pairing of the semi-finals results from the winners of the quarter-finals. Our first duel will feature the contestant you all voted back in, Daolun, the shadow under the rose bushes, and the man who had struggled his way here all the way from the preliminaries, the slayer of Dumting, the Dragon Knight, Caleb. And the second match will feature the slayers of favorites, Bartholomew Matthias and Iblin Godfrey, the men who surprisingly kicked out our 2 favorites for the title, Laika and Nam. Without further ado, let's greet the participants for the first match. Daolun, Caleb, please come to the arena. UMI call drops announced the continuation of the tournament. Caleb stepped up to the stage, quite confident this time. After the battle with Bercy, he still had most of his prepared consumables left over, and he had used his time since to prepare for his opponent. He went to rewatch the fight between the Mud Wizard and Daolun, to come up with a counter. Since it ultimately became Daolun he had to face, he had visited the Mud Wizard in the medical wing after their fight, to get some tips on how to beat her. The mage didn't readily help him, but a few gold coins had loosened his tongue. This was how Caleb came to know about how the man died and the poison energy that the poison fairy had used on him. Although the wizard couldn't tell him what the exact purpose of the counters was, the Dragon Knight now had an idea of what to expect. In his current state, he was buffed by Twinkle Rainborn, the goblin shaman from his former team, pumped up with potions that raised his stats, and he went out of his way to use a scroll that temporarily granted the trait of Blood of Mithridates, which granted absolute immunity to all poison for 1h. With some luck, this and the new shield would be enough to win this match. Are the 2 of you ready? UMI asked as always. Caleb nodded, bringing out his new shield and his heat sword. He was ready. Daolun on the other hand, brought out 2 simple, unadorned daggers. Would she fight in melee combat? What happened to her hidden weapon arts? He remembered her using wavy daggers in her fight with the Crusader, but wasn't that more of a last resort? She cracked her long, slender neck, before she also nodded, giving the signal that she was ready, too. All right. Then let the match begin. UMI announced, and Daolun charged at him. Slightly surprised, Caleb raised his shield, to block her straightforward dagger attack. With the shield raised to block, it deployed a transparent bubble barrier around him. This effect was his preparation for her poison counter. The shield created this way had 75% of his own total defense and lasted for at least a minute before it had to be redeployed unless it was broken. Daolun's simple dagger covered in a dark aura clashed with his barrier. Sparks flew for a fraction of a second and it broke. Her attack continued, directly hitting his shield, leaving a notch on its surface. Ding! Poison energy has invaded your body. Poison counter +1. Ugh, the Dragon Knight moaned a little displeased, as the force on the shield far surpassed what he expected based on her previous fight. Daolun's usually cold face showed a small, smug smirk at his reaction. You are not the only ones who can use medicines. Chapter 1122 on Knightly Fighting. She had already shown most of her skills in previous fights and she was prepared to face several counters now. She knew that using the same tactics would work twice in this place. Like her opponent, Daolun had studied Caleb's previous fights and knew he would be prepared for the things she had already shown. What she had not done so far, was enhance herself. The fairy didn't need to buy drugs. She was a master of poisons, naturally, she also knew a thing or two about medicines. Although melee combat wasn't her forte, using it from the start had the element of surprise she needed to shake up his concentration. Breaking the membrane with her dagger, she spun around, aiming her other hand at him. Silver rain, she mumbled, and a torrent of silver needles exploded from her sleeve, turning the knight into a porcupine. Each needle was laced with her poison energy, invading his body. On a normal person, the energy would have acted like terrible poison and wreaked havoc in their body. Not so much on these people. Although she couldn't rely on the poisonous effect, it had other uses. Since the poison was countered, she concentrated on invading her opponent with her energy. As long as she kept up with. The moment her feet were back on the ground, her back bent back like a spring, barely avoiding the lance aiming for her heart. She could still feel the slight burn of a cut across her cheek and ear. Fluidly, she turned the evasion into an attack and kicked the knight in his armored stomach. Using him as a ledge, she pushed herself off and made a flick backward on her feet, facing him again. None of her needles, not even her kick, had dealt any damage to her opponent. However, she could feel her power flowing into his body. "If this is how you want to play, let's reverse the roles," the knight suddenly said with a charismatic smile and dropped a vial. The glass contained broke on the arena floor and the liquid spilled, suddenly turning into a thick smoke that blocked her vision. Was he serious? Unfortunately for him, it didn't work. Her power was already inside his body. She was easily able to locate him even without being able to see him. She stepped forward to charge at him when her foot hit something that rolled away. A black, roughly apple-sized, 0.0. Shocked, she rushed back as fast and far as she could before the hand grenade detonated, sending shrapnel across the arena. How was this reversing roles? Chink! Kia! Her scream echoed across the stadium. A terrible pain, as if her lower leg was cut off, was coursing through her body. Looking at the ground, a metal contraption of spikes eagerly bit down on her leg, drawing blood. She had stepped on a trap. The knight had not just thrown the hand grenade inside the fog. Teary-eyed and slightly ashamed to have screamed at the sudden pain, she bent over to pry apart the jaws of the trap, only to be surprised by another small, black thing rolling at her feet. In great hurry, she ripped apart the flimsy trap and ran away. After a moment, there was no explosion this time. Instead, she felt spikes pierce the bottom of her feet. Caltrops, the arena floor was littered in caltrops. The worst kind, with barbs on their tips. When did this man start fighting like a fiend? Where did he even get caldrops that could pierce the soles of her earth-grade shoes? Under pain, her resentment for Caleb grew, and she used it to combat the pain of removing the caldrops from her feet. As she did it, she noticed that her opponent gave her an awful lot of time. What was he planning? She used a salve on her feet and waited with bated breath. Although the arena seemed to be covered in traps that were hard to see in the fog, her opponent had stopped attacking after the initial grenade and the second thing that didn't explode. She had a suspicion. Could it be that Caleb, although he deployed the fog, couldn't see in it either? The grenade was thrown right after it was deployed, and the second thing only came after she revealed her position with a scream. If it was like this, then as long as she didn't reveal her position, her opponent would be helpless. Daolun on the other hand was able to know where Caleb was, and he had not moved from his initial position. Was he listening for a sign of her, like a spider in a net? If it was like this, then she was able to win this. Suddenly, she felt a disturbance in the energy. Caleb had not changed position, but he moved. Shortly after, she heard the sound of something falling on the arena again. Her heart jumped when she saw the black thing not too far away from her, just close enough to barely see it. This time, she didn't run. Even without properly seeing it, it didn't seem like the explosive. She shuffled closer, silently evading stepping onto any more traps or caldrops. A stone. What had fallen on the arena wasn't a grenade, but a dark stone roughly the shape and size of one. Then, was the previous one also a stone? Not only had she let out an embarrassing cry, she even fled in panic from a stone. Her face burned a little. She would make him pay for that. Caleb is really going all out, but can he actually call himself a knight at this point? Lydia joked about the situation in the arena. The Dragon Knight was more like a trapper or assassin at this point, using all kinds of elaborate tricks. Although it wasn't forbidden, Caleb was really excessive in using consumables. Seth didn't condemn him. He found it actually quite interesting that someone thought of using such relatively simple means in this kind of high-level battle. The only problem with this strategy was that it wasn't very sustainable. The capital investments for this kind of effect were immense and didn't last long, while it would lose effectivity as the enemy grew stronger or more skillful. This was why Seth preferred items with permanent effects over temporary effects and consumables, as they didn't need any further maintenance or cost. He also knew himself too well. He would just keep forgetting or get confused if there was too much to keep in mind. As they were talking, things in the arena had taken a boring turn. Being barely able to see the combatants thanks to the golem cameras, the audience was quite calm, almost bored, as neither of them moved, playing mind games with each other. This situation persisted for a bunch of excruciating minutes when things in the arena began to change again. Nobody knew when exactly it happened, but the bright mithril plates covering the arena floor seemed to have turned darker in the blurry fog, and it kept doing so. The lowering of the golem down to the floor revealed the shocking truth: the arena floor was being covered in vicious-looking bugs. The only place not covered in bugs was a small radius surrounding Caleb, as if they were avoiding him. Or rather, his vision, as the Dragon Knight seemed unaware of the darkness hiding in his own fog. Moments later, the knight's screams resounded. The black mass covering the arena began to move, engulfing Caleb in a tsunami of flesh-eating bugs. The scene was displayed on all screens, recorded by several golem eyes that had surrounded Caleb in anticipation of this scene. Biting and ripping at what little skin was exposed from his armor, the little critters seemed to become even more ravenous. Caleb slowly vanished in the mass of insects, only his panicky screams were heard. But these soon turned to an angry roar and the pile exploded. The fog and bugs were swept away, revealing the night beneath. The eyes in Minas Mar's booth suddenly flew to Seth, who pursed his lips in disapproval. It was clear what they wanted to say. Caleb suddenly looked like him. The Wyvern Knight was covered in flames, wearing them like armor. This had to be the effect of another scroll. Would Caleb also get the Burning Savage title? Wearing his mount as armor, covered in fire, Caleb was at his current strongest form. Would the two finally start fighting for real? Chapter 1123 Silver Sparrow. Caleb could still feel the crawling on his skin, the pain, and the disgust. How deprived did one have to be to try and feed their opponent alive to insects? The wounds had mostly healed and the insects were burned away, but the trauma stayed. Still, he kept his cool, unlike when facing Dumting and blowing his budget. The battle that ensued was an honest melee battle without much cunning. He had switched to his lance to keep her at bay and used his shield and its barrier to guard against the showers of hidden weapons. He wanted to beat the cultivator in a fair contest of skill. To his dismay, they were evenly matched in melee combat. Despite having the better reach, he could not gain the upper hand against the poison fairy that kept agilely avoiding his attack. The fact that he had to avoid his own trap now, too, didn't make it better. His problem was that he wouldn't be able to keep going for much longer. The match stretched on, closing in on the 1-hour mark, meaning that soon the trait of Blood of Mithridates, which granted him immunity to her poisons, would vanish. At this point, he didn't know what would happen. Even if she had kind of given up on using the poison cloud, the Dragon Knight was still afflicted by 7 poison counters. It was 9 before, but when the bugs attacked him, the counters slightly decreased for some reason. But he couldn't let his guard down. When his immunity was gone, he was guaranteed to lose. Ultimately, Caleb decided to use more of the items he had prepared for the final stretch. Even if it meant losing the finale, he could accept letting her win after what she did to him. Daolun saw. The Dragon Knight had suddenly charged away from her, a piece of parchment appearing in his hands. She knew what that meant. She had seen his fight against the evil bloke. She gritted her teeth. She couldn't allow this guy to grow any stronger. With a heavy heart, she made her final move. The Silver Sparrow would reap another life. Seth had his eyes glued to Daolun the moment the fight ended. It was the same move she used against April Vine. A special silver needle flung at incredible speed and exuding a peculiar power left her hand. Using Thaia's vision, he was able to observe the item in minute detail. With a sharp tip and small fletching protruding from its back, it looked like a crossbow bolt but the size of a knitting needle. Silver Sparrow, poisoned. Legendary. Physical damage, 2100. Chi damage, 3000. Durability, 1/1. 1 ignore defense. 2 deal 250% energy damage. 3 internal rupture. 4 plus 150% poison damage. The legendary Silver Sparrow, the perfect assassination weapon for the assassin practiced in chi and poison arts. With a low durability by design, it will explode upon entering the opponent's body, becoming untraceable after killing the target. Restrictions: one-time use. Now Seth understood what you meant when called it a consumable heaven-grade weapon. By design, it was made to destroy itself, creating the effect of internal rupture, turning the opponent's inside to mush. The question now was, how many did Daolun actually have? She used one against April Vine but didn't use it against the Crusader before, despite her imminent loss. Was she hesitant to use it because she didn't have a great number of them, or was there a different reason she didn't use it at the time? These were just a few quick thoughts that shot through his mind, as he watched the weapon unfold its horrifying power. Caleb's armor, fused with his wyvern mount, could barely put up any resistance, as the needle penetrated the armor plates like a hot knife entering butter. With the speed and force that it flew, one would have expected it to straight up pierce the night and exit his body on the opposite side. But as the description described, the needle completely vanished after entering Caleb's body. The man in question, who was about to rip a scroll, froze where he stood before a fountain of blood ejected from his mouth, eyes, nose, and ears. And maybe some other non-visible orifices. His internal organs had been ripped apart by the explosion of the Silver Sparrow and its shrapnel. He unceremoniously died, falling over after taking a final step. Caleb was the second one felled in the arena this way, April was the first. Would there be a third? In the finale, she would either meet Matthias Bartholomew, the chosen of Baldur, or she would have a rematch with Eibhlin Godfrey, who won against her before. Would she be able to win the second time around? No matter what. We have our first finalist. Daolun has slain Caleb, the Dragon Knight, and moves on to the finale. UMI call drops finally announced at the end of the 1-hour-long fight. Now they were getting close to early evening with 2 more fights to go. Do you want to go meet Caleb, now that he lost? Seth asked Jane. After all, now that he was out of the tournament, he had some contractual duties to fulfill. You are right, it will be good if I brief him about our plans for today. I will also gather the other people we recruited, to give them an update all at once, she agreed with a happy smile. Since she was the one who made the slaw employment contract with Caleb, it was only fair that she got to boss him around. Good idea, I will leave you to it, he said his goodbyes. Since their plans for later had been rather spontaneous, they had almost forgotten to gather their mercenaries and friends and inform them about what was about to happen. They would have some time to prepare and they wouldn't unknowingly interfere with their plan by jumping out at the wrong moment. On that note, any messages from the lookouts? The blacksmith asked Mary and Lena. But the two shook their heads. There is yet to happen anything in their hideout and we have not gotten any messages of other forces making their way here, yet, Love gave a short status report. May, waiting for something even bigger kinda ruined my excitement for the finale, Finn complained a little sullen. She had sunken down on her seat, watching people on the arena floor, busy cleaning up all the stuff Caleb had distributed to catch Daolun. Right, it's a little like a spoiler, saying the result of the grand event isn't even that important for the plot, hey. Seth sympathized with her but didn't quite agree. After all, the whole reason for the whole event still persisted. Python was constantly gaining faith and Seth's reputation had skyrocketed thanks to repeating what was up for grabs as the final prize. The power of existence he gathered per day had more than doubled since the tournament started, reaching about 500p a day in the past few days. His excitement over the quickly growing points was only dampened by the risen price for a level up. Even if he saved up all his points, he was still weeks away from reaching Level 7 as a legendary forger. On the other hand, if he didn't intend to rigorously save up, he finally had some points to experiment with upgrading materials, like Tort's neuradamantium alloy, or the materials of the Guyver. They were projects he had put on ice for the past weeks, as he worked on other stuff. He put these thoughts aside when things continued in the arena. The remnants of Caleb's strategy were cleaned away and UMI had called the next 2 participants to the arena. Chapter 1124 Crusader vs Chosen. The 2 combatants of the final round of the semi-final had entered the arena, facing each other. On one side was Eibhlin Godfrey. Looking like the spitting image of a crusader with his great helmet, mail armor, and unique surcoat. The only thing spitting in the face of the image was his modern weaponry consisting of heavy firearms and explosives. As if deliberately trying to be the exact opposite was Bartholomew Matthias, the chosen of Baldur, god of light and peace. Contrary to his opponent, he was almost completely naked and unarmed. Solely the pair of trousers he wore protected the billions of viewers from witnessing his dangly crown jewels. Despite looking like opposites, if one compared their fighting styles so far, they were more similar than one would expect. Both relied on an overwhelming defense, reliant on holy skills while dealing powerful attacks in melee and long-distance combat. Ready? Then begin. UMI announced the start of the battle. The chosen of Baldur immediately charged forward, closing the distance. He was met by a hail of gunfire. However, the bullets could not penetrate his defense and bounced off. Ultimately, his fist struck the Crusader's shield, creating cracks in the invisible barrier. Before you ask, I will not show you the courtesy of agreeing to a holy duel, Bartholomew informed his opponent, as he punched the shield several more times, ignoring the bullets bouncing off his ABS. The holy duel, which allowed the Crusader to fight in the name of his god and would increase his power tremendously, was the reason Eibhlin was able to best Leica in their previous fight. Although Bartholomew seemed like a battle freak, he was obviously not stupid enough to play on hard mode this late in the tournament. Godfrey stayed calm, relying on the shield. Although it was cracking, it didn't seem like it would burst anytime soon. Thank you for your consideration, but don't worry. I will still win, he said with solemn confidence. The machine gun in his hands vanished and something else appeared in his hand, shining in a blinding golden light. Even Bartholomew was forced to let off of the barrier and take some distance. Let me introduce you to my holy lance, Matthias, he revealed, and the light condensed. It was a massive machine gun as tall as himself and with a barrel as thick as his wrist. The upright standing firearm fell forward, landing on a materializing tripod. The moment it connected, a near-shattering shot was fired that echoed through the stadium. The arena shook with dust rising into the air. Not even Seth was able to follow the zooming projectile that left the barrel, ripping a chunk off Bartholomew's side without even losing speed. The Chosen had tried evading in the last moment, preventing it from piercing his stomach. Godfrey was quite unique on Earth, as he was one of the few who had not converted to the ways of the system. One could say that he was the peak of the way of Y-City, where people had been forced to strive for a fusion of magic and science. As technology stopped working in Epsilon at the beginning of the apocalypse and they refused outside interference from the Pathworks because of the early invasion of the Muir Empire, it was the only place where people like Iblin could come from. Although Beta had a similar fate in the beginning, they fell too early. How much he would have liked to appraise Iblin's guns, but they had all been enchanted with a power that blocked appraisal. The blacksmith would have loved to know where these guns came from, or whether the person who made them was even still alive. He would have already been happy learning how they blocked the appraisal. According to Lena, there were several ways to block appraisal, the most common being a specific skill being involved. However, these skills were incredibly rare and books or scrolls containing them were not even sold on the auction house. At least there was none, ever since Seth had gotten his VIP status. Allegedly there were also some enchantments with the effect, but not even the Krana Empire had someone who knew an enchantment for blocking the appraisal of an item. It was just a short thought, that was drowned as the machine gun did what was expected of it, firing. UMI's commentary, the murmurs of the audience, everything fell silent as Matthias started speaking in rapid fire. A dust storm rose from the arena as the stadium was shaken by the gun's roars and the stream of bullets pelted Bartholomew. A layer of light covered the champion's body, barely deflecting the stream of bullets, as he was helplessly pushed back under the impact of Iblin's attack. With a roar, Bartholomew exploded in a nova of searing light, blowing away bullets and Iblin. The radiant light made it hard to look at. Unlike in the previous fight, when he became a well-defined silhouette of white light, the light was spread out, actually hiding his figure in the brightly illuminated area. Haha, how about this? Can you still hit me? Bartholomew taunted, confident in his skill. It was true, not even the audience far away was able to see him with their bare eyes. But Iblin stayed calm, as he pulled something from his inventory. Don't worry, I can deal with it, he said smugly, putting on a pair of shades, on top of the great helmet's eye slits. Equipped with his pair of shades, the Holy Lance Matthias started roaring again, breathing out shower after shower of holy high-caliber bullets. They vanished in the brightness, many playing a rapid staccato when they exploded on the opposite side of the barrier that covered the arena and protected the audience from the powers of the participants. Do you think the barrier can hold on? Mina suddenly asked, a little concerned. She had zoomed in on the perspective of a golem eye, that was observing the barrier, which was slowly forming cracks after being repeatedly shot in the same spot by the overblown weapon. Don't worry, even if it breaks, that's just the first layer, Love informed her calmly. The wise Death Bride had already thought of this. Like the arena floor covered in mithril, the barrier had also gotten an upgrade during the transition to the final battles. Although they were prepared, it didn't mean that they would have expected participants below level 100 and without legendary items to exert this amount of damage. It would have been a reason for concern if Iblin had the buff on top of firing the Holy Lance. At that point, he may have posed a threat to the barrier and maybe even the audience. However, this was not the worst-case scenario. The barrier cracked, but it didn't break. Matthias dealt just enough damage to overcome the self-repair function in that small area. Watching the spectacle, Seth's curiosity about the maker of those firearms only grew. After all, who was able to create such powerful armaments and be able to stay hidden from their eyes? Well, it wasn't like they had been actively looking for a gunsmith, but one would have expected to hear about them through rumors. Solar Spear! A shout suddenly echoed through the arena and a giant spear materialized from light shot toward the Crusader. It seemed like Bartholomew finally decided to counterattack. The magic attack the size of a bus crashed into Iblin's invisible barrier, finally crushing it to smithereens and directly hitting the holy cannoneer. Tightly grasping his holy lance, Iblin was catapulted away and rolled a little further across the arena floor before finally coming to a halt. I finally got through the shell, Bartholomew spoke, breathing heavily. The light had dimmed and revealed the severe bruises and wounds that covered his body. But Iblin didn't react. The Crusader was mumbling something, lying on the ground. That with it thou mayst blow thine enemies to tiny bits, in thy mercy. 1. What are you mumbling about? Is it the last prayer for your God? Bartholomew asked with mild mockery in his voice. 2. The solemn voice of the Crusader was transmitted through the speakers in the stadium, confusing the audience. Why was he counting? Bartholomew realized that his counting probably didn't mean anything good, but by the time he wanted to make distance, it was too late. 3. He threw something at the chosen of Baldur, who was not standing far away. The whole arena was swallowed by an explosion. Roaring flames and black smoke surged against the barrier that barely managed to contain the final attack of Iblin Godfrey. Umi Caldrops was spared from suffering, as she was just outside the barrier when it happened. It was impossible to see what was happening in the arena. All they could do now was wait for one or both of them to appear in the medical wing, or for the smoke and fire to subside. Chapter 1125 Double Wipeout. The smoke had yet to dissipate when the message came from the medical wing. Bartholomew Matthias had just respawned in the sick area, meaning Iblin Godfrey was the winner of this duel. Umi lowered her altitude to look for him and announce his victory. With the whiz of her microphone, a strong gust swept over the arena, revealing that it was empty. After the shocking revelation, she got another notification from the medical wing. I just got the notification, both contestants have now appeared at the medical wing. However, Iblin Godfrey appeared a full 2 minutes later, making him the victor of this match. Iblin Godfrey moves on to the finals, she called out. The cheers of the audience were mixed, as the fight ended in a double wipeout, with the winner not present in the arena. Iblin's victory also meant they would get a reprise of a previous match. In the final, Daolun and Iblin would meet each other once again on the field of battle. Would the Poison Fairy be able to overcome her previous defeat and ultimately become the tournament champion? Would the Crusader continue his winning streak? What intrigued Seth about this was that he had no idea what either of the two would ask of him as their prize. He was no gunsmith and Iblin seemed to have his source for a good firearm, so what would he wish for from a blacksmith? Daolun used a wide array of weapons, but her main means of attack was her poison. Neither seemed likely to ask for a weapon, so maybe it would be armor? Or something along the lines of a token, as Nam had asked of him. The half-rotten swordsman had given Seth the parchments containing the schematics of his master, but they were not like a skill book or an enchantment scroll that allowed him to directly learn it. The blacksmith would need to study them closer, to adapt them to the system skills. He would probably have to ask Grant May, their in-house enchanter, to cooperate with him on this endeavor. He had already some experience with the methods of artificers from the voracious Cloud Continent, because of the booklets you had given way back when they first met. Allison worked a lot on adapting the recipes to the system and finding fitting ingredients, creating her best potions to date. Seth had not bothered trying to do the same. Although he had no full understanding of the simple artificer enchantments in the booklet, their description made them out to be not much better than the enchantment he had already known at the time. Back then, he rather concentrated on raising his proficiency, than spending time on research. However, just a cursory glance at the schematics Nam had given him, convinced Seth that this blueprint was on the level of a legendary enchantment, made up of a mix of engravings and enchantment formations. If Seth succeeded in replicating it in a way that was recognized by the system, it would be a huge addition to his repertoire as a legendary forger. If Daolun managed to win her rematch, would she bring him something even more interesting than Nam? Maybe the blueprint for those silver bolts, the silver sparrows? Although they were only one-time use, the one use one got out of them was one hell of a use. If he managed to produce them in numbers, they could be a great trump card for assassin players. Especially the agent Undercade would profit a lot from such an ace if the production wasn't too costly. However, before he dreamed any further of getting his hands on even more good stuff, they had to see the tournament and the Pythian Games, to an end. The final match would herald the grand climax of the day, according to the info they got from their scouts. Currently, Daolun and Iblin were having a 30-minute break in the medical wing to recover for the final. Meanwhile, they had the finalists of the musician contests give another show, enchanting the audience. It was the calm before the storm, literally. Cavern in the mountains south of Little Gamma. Safely hidden in a dark corner, behind a stack of shipping crates, he sat and watched the live feed of the golem eyes. Although the spy golems were great at secretly recording, their ability to transmit the data across wide ranges was deliberately cut short. The magic signal could have allowed them to be detected, this was why he stayed close by to collect the data and transmit the files once something of importance happened, and it seemed like something was about to happen. On the floor of the vast cavern, teams of cultists were getting busy, running left and right. They prepared the formation and placed materials in specific places of the drawing. The foci of the magic circle. With the final fight around the corner, it seemed like they also became serious. He watched them on the screen, as the markings carved on the ice filled with blue light. As the light grew brighter, the lines drawn on the floor grew thicker. This was different from the teleportation circles he had seen at Mina's Palin or the System Church. In the end, all lines had fused together into a big circle. No, it was a gate like the entrance of some dungeon. A spatial passage had been created in the ice cavern below the glacier and didn't take long before the first people passed through. Appearing first were cultivators riding on swords and similar devices. They headed straight for the ceiling, destroying it to make space for what followed them. Next were small flying vessels, not dissimilar to airships or space shuttles, and then his jaw dropped. The ceiling had to go, for what appeared now. Huge flying ships. They had neither sails nor oars, but there were literal ships and barges levitating in the air. They had vivid carvings of vicious beast faces at their bow and devices like cannons lined their flanks. A flying fleet was ascending above the glacier. Hurriedly, he compiled what he had seen and was about to leave the cave to send the message, when the mother of all ships passed through the gate. A giant dragon-faced bow surfaced from the whirling energy portal, a massive cannon in its maws. It was rising vertically, straight into the sky. It was so big that there was not even a finger's breadth between the edge of the portal and its flanks. This thing was so big, that it looked like it could have been carved from a crown scraper tree, so the size of a big container ship. Its deck was overflowing with imposing people in bright robes. He could only stare at it until finally, the back was slowing exiting the gate. But at this point, his eyes were no longer on the ship, but on the man sitting on a throne at the back of the massive flying ship. The agent was terrified by looking at the man. Even at this distance, his aura was like facing a boss double his own level or more. An insurmountable wall, certain death if faced directly. He had to leave and send the message. He had to pry away his eyes. But he could, his gaze was still on the many finely chiseled features, that showed an indiscernible age when the man suddenly turned his head. With leisure, the elder looked to the side. Their eyes had locked. The agent could have sworn that he saw him. But the terrifying, piercing eyes swept over him like nothing happened. Bathed in cold sweat, he finally regained the power over his legs and left the cavern in a hurry. Whether he saw him or not, he had to contact Minas Mar about this. Chapter 1126 They are coming. I just got the report, it seems they are coming, Lena informed the group sitting in the VIP lounge. They had invited Poulter and the others over for a briefing, while they waited for the final match to begin. Everyone watched the footage of the flying ship passing through the portal. Especially the scene of the last ship and the figure sitting on the throne had everyone holding their breath. Although it couldn't compare to Epsilon's mothership in size, it was still humongous and the aura of the old man was peculiar and somewhat familiar to a few of them. That's the master of the Silk River sect, that little freak actually dared to come over, Master Mountain exclaimed when he saw him. Daring to display his aura in a foreign world, Hao Peng, the master of the Snow Falcon sect mumbled at the sight. Even if he stepped into the realm of an immortal, is he not afraid of the world's suppression, he complained. Earth's world will is only just awakening, you whispered to him. Seth had an inkling about what you meant, but the realization of why the man's aura felt so familiar pushed itself into the foreground. It was similar to when they faced the undead ancient dragon, the Stoorworm, and when he interacted with Apollo for a moment. Immortals from the voracious cloud continent would roughly equate to a legend in the system. And that was what he recognized, the aura that could only come from someone with the power of a legend. The blacksmith didn't like to admit it, but realizing that they would be facing an actual legend in this battle, shook him. They had legends on their side, like Ceres and the Guardian Tree, but they weren't prepared to fight a being on their level. Python grew a lot, to the point that Seth didn't even know how strong she was now, but he didn't get the notification that she became a legend or ascended to become a god, yet. She had fallen into a kind of hibernation after swallowing the demon. Of course, He heard that there were differences in power levels for legends, just like how different paths had different outcomes, but he doubted a legendary cultivator would be weak in combat. Don't worry, if your WIRM can't take it, we will step in, Hao Peng, the old man who had pleaded with him for help to find his granddaughter just a few weeks ago, reassured him. Was his worry that obvious? Thanks, the blacksmith thanked him with an appreciative smile. Seth was very confident in Myanmar's power, in general. But his confidence had wavered with the sudden reveal of their enemy's power level. It wasn't because he thought they couldn't beat them. Seth was selfish, he wasn't worried about being able to beat them, but about having to make sacrifices to do so. He wasn't ready, no, he wasn't willing to sacrifice anything. He invested quite a lot into his friends and the people of Myanmar, and not just material things. Even their most recent allies, he wasn't willing to throw out to die. Others could throw their men into a desperate fight, to eke out a vain victory, but what the blacksmith wanted was a clean and crushing victory, where only their opponent suffered losses. They could all go suck a big one, but he wasn't willing to sacrifice anything for this cruel world. Welcome to our grand final. You all have watched the past 5 days in excitement. The brutal fights, the bloody destruction, everything led to this moment. And thanks to our audience, we actually get to watch a rematch. Please greet our finalist, Daolun, the shadow under the rose bushes, and Iblin Godfrey, the holy cannoneer. UMI call drops announced shortly after the break ended. It had become evening now. The sun was growing closer to the mountain range in the west and its warm light had a tinge of orange. It was the perfect setting for the final showdown of two fierce rivals. UMI gave the two a moment for trash talk, but neither of the two was the talkative type. When she realized that neither of them would be willing to jump over their shadow and give the audience a show, she continued with the normal procedure. Are you two ready? She asked and her question was answered by their nodding. Then let the final fight of this grand tournament begin, she exclaimed, accompanied by the roars of the audience and the firearms in the arena. The moment the battle began, bullets filled the air. But not just bullets, but also poison smoke. At first, it looked like a redo of their original fight, but the sudden sound of impacts in the fog, which even overshadowed the gunfire, said otherwise. Every time an impact rang, the smoke would part, revealing the scene of Daolun, smashing her daggers into Iblin's shield. Like in her fight with Caleb, she was seeking a direct confrontation with Iblin. This time she was not naive enough to agree to a holy duel. On top of that, it seemed that she was also using doping again, as her movements were even faster than when fighting the Dragon Knight. Especially her speed. It was thanks to her risen speed, that she had no problems evading Iblin's bullet spray. Even at close range. Having little to no vision and faced with the high-speed foe, it seemed like the first time that the Crusader truly experienced difficulties. Every impact of Daolun's left a spiderweb of cracks on his barrier. Although the cracks mended after a while, they had already seen that it could be overcome. Maybe Bartholomew Matthias succeeding in smashing the invisible shield, had given the poison fairy the confidence in this strategy. Yeah, get that turtle. Galwell cheered for Daolun. As an aggressive man, he didn't like the way Iblin fought, albeit he had to admit that it was effective. Things looked good for her. The only worry was Iblin's holy lance. There was no telling whether Daolun could compete with that. To call him a turtle, when even you would run from his Matthias, Brock scoffed sarcastically. The master of the Boulder Guild thought calling a tank a turtle was ignorant. Humph. I could take it, probably, Galwell said defiantly, but he piped down a little. The fight had not been on for a long when a stadium staff approached their seat. They were not hard to recognize in their black and yellow uniforms. Mr. Galwell, Mr. Aris and the Lords of Myanmar ask for your presence in the VIP lounge of Myanmar, they said with a slight bow. What? He wants us to visit them in the middle of the final. Galwell exclaimed, peeved. Obviously, he wasn't willing to just drop watching the final battle. Brock was similarly unhappy. I was ordered to inform you that it is concerning today's climax, they added mysteriously. A simple listener may have thought it was about the final or the prize ceremony after that. But the two men had already been informed about what was going to happen today. Myanmar asking for their presence, probably meant that the plans needed to change or something unforeseen happened. All right, let's go, Brock didn't resist much and agreed. Fine, I'm following, Galwell said, still a little moody. Chapter 1127 The Final. It was an unexpected but not unwelcome chance for retribution. She could still vividly remember the feeling of shrapnel and bullets biting into her flesh. Maybe because she just had a fight that reminded her of the painful memory, but that didn't matter. This time, it wouldn't end like that. This time things were different. After her loss, Minasmar had asked her, just like the other losers, to stay at their rooms in the stadium until the finals began. It was for the voting, the chance to re-enter the battle. She had spent that time analyzing her fight over and over. Daolun had learned her lesson. She had been too arrogant when she first entered this competition. The preliminaries had given her a false sense of superiority. Her opponents had dropped like flies without her even showing a fraction of her abilities. Things had changed after she entered the true tournament. Every opponent had brought her to the limit, forcing her to reveal more and more of her trump cards. She had even revealed her bug-handling techniques. She even used 2 of her silver sparrows. However, she didn't regret it. It was all worth it as long as she won. Hoping for that sliver of a chance to re-enter during the quarter-finals, she had looked into all her possible opponents, but Iblin Godfrey especially. It was the reason she even got a new pair of daggers, retraining her dagger arts. It was the reason why she adopted the tactics of Earth Hands, doping herself before the fight. She had not expected to use this strategy on the Dragon Knight first, it was actually the plan to overwhelm Iblin if she happened to meet him. Although Iblin had revealed his worrying holy lance in the battle with the light man, she didn't waver. Her unadorned daggers smashed into the invisible shield, creating huge spider webs of cracks. She knew that she was physically superior to her opponent, with the doping even more than before. This was why she was a little disappointed that it didn't go like when she faced Caleb, where every hit was able to smash the barrier. She knew that her previous tactic of dissolving it wouldn't work. She had to do with brute force. Still, the performance of these daggers was far above what she expected. She had asked for a pair of unadorned blades from the lady they called Jane and bartered several bottles of poison for them. Daolun had never expected to get a pair of weapons that would be able to handle her poison chi for this long. This meant they had to be at least Earth-grade weapons. She had been very depressed after her original was cracked and unusable after the first fight with Iblin. Had she known she could get something this good, she may have asked for something with more flair. As she grew confident in the weapons, she infused more and more poison chi into them. The more she could put in an attack, the more would stay in her opponent's body. Injecting her spiritual power into him was her most cost-effective chance to win. Dodging the bullet storm, it was hard to hit the same place several times, as Iblin's previous opponent did. She also lacked the kind of defense to just ignore these feisty little projectiles. No matter how hard hitting the same place every time was, it was the only way she could have weakened the barrier enough. Despite her increased power, it was hard to keep up with these foreign weapons and the power overflowing in her body, because of the pills she swallowed. Daolun could barely control the energy coursing in her chi veins, trying to eject as much as possible through the daggers. Had she maybe taken too much in preparation for this fight? This was probably the most she could take without her mind halted for a moment as she had a realization. At the end of this moment, this short hesitation, she suddenly stared down the barrel of the massive gun Matthias. The smaller roars had fallen silent, as a massive boom shattered her eardrums. There was no time to dodge, instinctively she just tilted to the side. Searing pain filled her mind and numbed her thoughts. She could no longer feel the left side of her face. The pain, the hot streams of water flowing down her neck, the influx of cold air flowing through her cracked molars, she was probably missing half her face right now. Tisk, you shouldn't have dodged, it would have been a painless, a merciful, a beautiful death I could have devoted to God, Iblin scoffed disappointed as he moved the rifle to aim at her again. Painless. Merciful. Her eyes regained focus and her mind regained clarity when these words sank into her consciousness and stoked a fire. Who wanted that? Did she ask for that? How dare he look down on her like this, to even stage her death? When he wanted to end this in a clean, and beautiful victory, she would do her worst to win as ugly and messy as possible. Her own ideal of the fight was gone. She struggled, tumbled, and rolled over the ground to evade the next shot, that drilled a hole into the metal plates covering the arena floor. She let go of a dagger to pull out jade bottles and vials from her cosmos pouch. Pills and poisons were randomly shoved into her face. Daolun had realized one thing, to win she didn't have to survive, she just had to kill her opponent before she died herself. The pills and poisons liquefied on her tongue, fusing into her body and spiritual sea. Like a roaring river, the force pushed through her, wrecking her body, but bringing tremendous force with it. Her hand gripped the remaining dagger tight, her bones and sinews creaking under the strength. Her eyes trailed over to the Crusader, who was already aiming at her again. The moment he fired, she was gone. With explosive strength, she used her movement art to practically vanish from his sight. She strained her body and allowed the poison chi to drill outward, through every pore of her skin. She became a shooting star, with a trail of poison, cloaked in her own poison smoke. The dagger was now not just surrounded with poison aura, but dripping with liquid, materialized from her power. With accumulated speed, velocity, and strength she stabbed the barrier moments after the third shot. There was an audible cracking, the tip of the dagger, at the center of a massive spider web of cracks, had pierced through. Finally, she was able to break through the barrier. Just the tip was inside the barrier, but that was enough, as the tiniest drop of liquefied poison chi turned into a thick fog that filled the bubble of her opponent. Daolun knew that her opponent seemed immune to poison, but she also couldn't completely believe it to be without effects. She had watched the vision they called a recording of their last fight over and over. Maybe it was just her imagination, but she could swear that Iblin was not as unharmed after the bath in poison as it had seemed to her back then. Had she kept using her poison and not accepted a stupid duel, she may have still won in the end. This mist was created from the utmost concentration of her overflowing poison chi. If this had no effect, then a violent coughing from the inside confirmed her thoughts. She could feel her energy invading his body. Chapter 1128 The Final, 2. Things became a little crowded in the VIP lounge of Mina's March. They had assembled all their collaborators, mercenaries, and allies currently present in Little Gamma for a final briefing before the climax. Since things had slightly changed, knowing that there was someone of legendary status among the enemy, their plan also needed corrections. This was why they had also called in local leaders like Galwell and Brock to prepare thoroughly as a backup. There were many grim faces upon the reveal of the full extent of the enemy force they were expecting. To hear that someone with a legendary status was among the attackers shocked many of them. After all, people like Galwell or Brock had only just stepped on the path to legend. Wouldn't it be more sensible if we took the fleet and met them before they reach Little Gamma? Jonia, the fleet commander of Epsilon, suggested. As someone from a place with next to no contact with a system force, it was her first time hearing of legends. When the path to legends was mentioned, she couldn't even hear it, since she had yet to reach Leave 90. This was why could suggest such a bold tactic, unafraid of the extent of the power of a legend, which was treated like a nuclear weapon by forces like Spacia or Krina. No, we are in a better position if we defend here, than facing them out there, Monique explained their decision. If they met them on the open field, or rather the open mountain range, they would lose their advantage of having the guardian tree in their back. It would also go against their original plan, which was to give Python another stage to act as the protector of Little Gamma. As they talked, the fight in the arena took its turn, with Daolun gaining the upper hand. The surprising turn of the fight was appreciated, but overshadowed by other news, as the notifications from the scouts came in the middle of the briefing. The swarm of cultivators and their fleet had come to a hold among the mountains south of Little Gamma. Hidden from the view of the tree station, it seemed like they were waiting for the right time to act. All right, I think everyone should have understood the situation at this point. Let's finish the meeting quickly so everyone can go and do their tasks, Seth announced. Since they were waiting for the right moment, they still had some more time. At least until the final of the grand tournament ended. And someone has to inform Python to finish up. Ding! You have been afflicted with the status effect of deadly poison. Minus 50 HP per second. Ding! Your skill poison immunity has failed to resist deadly poison. Ding! Your skill deadly poison resistance leave 4 has failed to resist deadly poison. Ding! Poison energy has invaded your body. Poison counter +2. Ding! Your skill poison immunity has succeeded to resist poison energy. Iblin was coughing heavily as he drank a healing potion to offset the deadly poison for now. The effects were much worse than the last time he faced her. How could she use such a terrifying poison? Last time he managed to hide the effects, but it was too late now. He should have prepared something to negate poison, instead of relying only on his skills. But he felt it would have been wrong to just chalk it up to being not prepared. His opponent had made a terrifying transformation. It was not just her outward appearance that turned from the composed and fair poison fairy into a figure oozing terrifyingly deadly poison after he shot off half her face. Her fighting style had become much more terrifying in these past few days. When she put her mind to it, he stood no chance against her in a melee fight without the buff of the holy duel. He had seen her fight with Caleb, but experiencing it himself hit differently. Especially, since she started oozing poison, she had gone completely berserk. Throwing around Matthias, he tried to shoot her when she stormed at the barrier again, but he couldn't keep up. The pain in his throat and eyes made it hard to see, and every tick of the poison caused pain across his body. When he managed to aim, she simply vanished into the smoke and came from another place. Once again, the dagger pierced the barrier and sprayed in poison. Ding! You have been afflicted with the status effect of deadly poison. Minus 70 HP per second. Ding! Your skill Poison Immunity has failed to resist deadly poison. Ding! Your skill Deadly Poison Resistance Leave 4 has failed to resist deadly poison. Ding! Poison Energy has invaded your body. Poison Counter +2. Ding! Your skill Poison Immunity has succeeded to resist poison energy. Ugh, the poison actually stacked, forcing him to cast God's Grace, a heal over time, on himself, to stop his quickly bottoming out health bar from falling to 0. If things continued like this, he would have to. Boom! Another miss. No, not completely. He had grazed her hip this time. It seemed like her reaction had dulled. Then crack! Ding! You have been afflicted with the status effect of deadly poison. Minus 90 HP per second. Ding! Your skill Poison Immunity has failed to resist deadly poison. Ding! Your skill Deadly Poison Resistance Leave 4 has failed to resist deadly poison. Ding! Poison Energy has invaded your body. Poison Counter +2. Ding! Your skill Poison Immunity has failed to resist poison energy. His barrier was pierced again, and the poison was stacked again, but his resistance had failed. A sudden pain pierced his pain, like a terrible migraine, and his whole body ached. The vertigo had him almost throwing up his lunch. Was this the poison energy wrecking his insides? Boom! A miss. He had a hard time standing straight, not to mention aiming. He gritted his teeth. If only he had put some effort into learning more holy skills. He doubted he would have such a problem now if he had learned Cure or Detoxification. As things stood, there was no way he could win this the normal way. Who would have thought he would use this twice in the same day? Reaching into his inventory, an Imperial Orb appeared in his hand. The Holy Hand Grenade. Although he wouldn't survive, but it would cause much less damage to him than to Daolun. His hands grabbed the cross-shaped pin when his barrier suddenly shattered. Without deterrent shots, the Poison Fairy had finally succeeded in layering the damage and breaking through. Despite her efforts, it didn't matter anymore. She couldn't stop him from pulling the... "No you don't," she exclaimed, her gaze so bright and wild it burned into the back of his eyes, just before he was blinded by a bright streak of silver light. He felt the terrible pain of something piercing his guts, followed by a burning heat and pain radiating through his whole body. It was just a fraction of a second before blood shot from all his orifices and he lost consciousness. Godfrey fell to the floor, lifeless. She had done it. In a panic, she had used her last silver sparrow to end Iblin, but it had paid off. He was unable to activate the final weapon. The golden ball rolled from his dead hand, the cross still stuck in it. A hot wave of relief washed through her aching body as the realization hit her. She had won. She had actually won. The frustration, the sorrow, the sadness if her original loss were not for naught. Ultimately, she had succeeded. She cancelled her technique and the poison fog dissipated, slowly giving view of the lifeless body of Iblin Godfrey. That was slowly vanishing as he respawned in the medical wing. It was the irrevocable sign that she had truly won, something nobody could take from her now. We have a winner. Daolun is the champion of the Grand Tournament and the final of the Pythian Games. She was able to hear Umi Caldrop's announcement in the distance as her consciousness slowly slipped away. All tension had left her body and the substances she had taken were running their course. A smile appeared on her face at the last moment before everything went dark. The winner was announced, but the fleet of cultivators had yet to move. What were they waiting for? Since they didn't crash in right after the fight, Minasmar had to continue the event as planned, which meant that once Daolun was revived and healed, they would hold the prize ceremony. As the sun slowly lowered and set the sky ablaze with a fiery sunset, the workers prepared a simple pedestal on the arena. Nobody fixed the floor, as they didn't want to wipe away the proud sign of the final battle. This was the battlefield of the two finalists, this was where the strongest would be given their hard-earned rewards. Giving them the rewards was Seth's job, as the Tower Master of Minas March. Since he would have to appear on the stage to give everyone their prizes, maybe this was the moment the enemy was waiting for. Chapter 1129 Annoying. Deep under the guardian tree of Little Gamma. Annoying. That thought was on her mind as she wound her body. One of the small ones had just informed her that her strength was needed and she didn't have much time. Her stomach was still full from all the faith and energy of the tiny demon. She didn't want to move. With just a little more time, she would be able to incorporate all this power and her foundation would be solid. She would finally be able to fulfill her long-cherished wish and overcome the wall that had kept her back for so long. Originally she thought she would be able to break the chains of destiny through her child, she had never expected to do it this way, but now she was this close. If she stopped now, what if she was held back again? Banging against those doors again, unable to ever cross? She knew what the blacksmith, her creator, planned. It was not a bad plan, but she was afraid to stop now. Maybe she could use a little trick to buy her time? The energy of the demon she swallowed. She compressed it into a tiny ball. She already had enough pure energy of faith to manifest her divinity, and there was still coming more. She didn't need this tainted one. The ball of energy became a ball and ultimately an egg. This would be enough to buy her time. She was sure. Seth, wearing a casual suit, entered the arena. Behind him followed Reiki, the fair bard, carrying a tablet. On it were 4 trophies of simple design, but forged from epic Olympian silver, as well as 3 white crystal cards and a card of similar size, but made from dark steel. The white crystal cards were the credit card equivalent of the system bank. Those for the 2 participants in third place, Caleb and Bartholomew, held 150 gold. The one for the second place, Iblin Godfrey, was worth 200 gold. The card forged from dark steel was the representation of the promise to create a legendary item for the winner of the grand tournament. Congratulating the third and second place with a trained smile, Seth handed them their trophy and prize money. Caleb's smile was a little strained. Understandably so. Compared to the money he had invested in his attempt to win, this was peanuts. Seth ignored him and continued. Iblin didn't show much emotion, simply taking his prize. 200 gold was a lot, when one didn't invest several thousand into trying to win. Finally, he came before Daolun. Now, she didn't look like the poison-drenched dreadnought that had bashed her dagger into Iblin's barrier. The fair young woman looked almost benign as she reciprocated his gaze, emotionless. It was hard to believe that she could fight in desperation like a berserker. You can come visit our branch of the Turquoise Anvil tomorrow and we can talk about what item you want, he whispered so only she could hear him. If it wasn't for the impending attack, he would have invited her to the lounge later that day. She simply nodded, her eyes glued to the card and trophy, as she took them from his hands. It seemed like it was true that epic-rated or Earth-grade materials were even more scarce on the Cloud continent than on Earth. Bartholomew's, Iblin's, and Caleb's reaction to the trophy was not as exaggerated. But maybe that was because they didn't quite know what they were given. It seemed like cultivators did not necessarily need an appraisal skill to identify high-grade materials. Daolun didn't answer out loudly but simply gave a silent nod to show that she had understood. She was still in a weird state of mind by the feeling of dying to her own poison, so she couldn't quite hide her emotions when she saw the luxurious prices. She could feel her spiritual energy react to them, the moment they were in her hands. She didn't know about other properties, but the affinity to spiritual energy was exceptional. These had to be at least Earth-grade materials. A statue and card made of Earth-grade materials. How many energy crystals could get for the card alone? Of course, she couldn't let go of the card, but the trophy was the same. There was enough material to make an Earth-grade sword or spear. In the hands of the right craftsman, they might even become low heaven grade. Her hand wound tightly around the black card, with a golden letter imprinted on it. She was about to think about what things she could do with the trophy but realized how empty such thoughts were. In her hands, she had the promise of a heaven-grade item, just for her. One made especially for her to her specifications. How grand was that? The trophy was just paltry compared to that. She would finally be able to fulfill her long-cherished wish and... Hoo! A siren interrupted her thoughts, and several things happened at the same time. Several transparent layers of barriers covered the eye of the arena, the Pythian village, and the audience. Flying ships, barges and other vessels appeared in the sky, accompanied by a swarm of cultivators and the sound of explosions. Various people in the stand jumped up from their seats, weapons in their hands. What in the world was going on? was her first thought, but she quickly surmised that the stadium was being attacked. Storing the trophy and card in her Cosmos pouch, she brought out the pair of daggers, ready to defend herself. The other people on the podium were no different from her, each taking a vigilant stance, ready to defend or attack. The only one who didn't seem surprised or disturbed at all was the Tower Master, who had just whispered to her. He simply looked to the sky, with a serious expression. Following his gaze, her eyes widened. After she was forced to become a loose cultivator in the Xiguang province, she came to know a good bit about the greater and minor powers in the region. She recognized the vessels of the Silk River sect crowing the sky, painted with shiny but muted varnish, and the distinctive tail of silken tubes, that made them look like they drew a silk river in the sky. The Silk River sect wasn't a great power across the province, but they were still a medium-sized sect, someone like her couldn't pick a fight with. Daolun also recognized some of the identifying features of other, smaller sects among the people in the sky. This was crazy. Did they attempt to start a war with Minas Mar, or Earth? Didn't the Immortal Summit discourage hostile actions? In the time it took her to try and grasp the situation, the scene in the stadium had changed. The people that had drawn weapons in the stand, had been subdued in an instant by some kind of invisible force. The big screens everywhere in the stadium showed scenes of the fleet of cultivators hovering above the Pythian village and Little Gamma. They looked tiny compared to the alien metropolis of giant, inhabitable trees, connecting to the lower branches of the giant tree's crown that covered them all. Why would they show this to so many people that they were currently under attack? Shouldn't they try to hide it? Unless, was this a show of power? Chapter 1130. Clearing his throat. With a satisfied smile, he saw the maggots on the ground squirm in panic. Standing aboard the main vessel of the Alliance fleet, Dum Ting watched the scene below in glee. It warmed his despicable heart, to see the chaos in the streets below rife with panic and fighting. Whole Hua, we ask all citizens to evacuate the Pythian village immediately. If you are able to, please use home call to evacuate now. Sirens and announcements sounded in the city below. People of the sect alliance that had infiltrated earlier and adventurers hired by their allies were causing havoc in the streets, fighting guards and other adventurers. Many of them vanished in the face of danger, but others tried to fight with their pathetic skills. The Oath Guards in their bright armor were easy to spot in the crowd, trying to protect these pathetic commoners and weaklings, allowing them to scurry around the streets in the direction of Little Gamma under the protection of the massive tree. He couldn't help but burst into laughter at the thought of their faces when the great barrier protecting the Pythian village fell. He couldn't wait for the despair in their eyes. They would raze the Pythian village to the ground, and this was just the start. All the pieces were already in place. Allowing them to flee or evacuate under the tree was just a false hope. How delectable would their despair be, when they realized that there was nowhere to hide. Once the Pythian village was flattened, the same would happen to Little Gamma. It was inevitable. The chaotic energy in his chest acted up. How much he wished he was down there to join the blood feast. But he held back. This was just the beginning, and it was not his stage yet. He calmed his bloodthirst with the thought of what was to come. He would harvest his fair share, once all defenses had fallen. Now then, where is that pesky serpent, that killed my elder Gok? I'm sect leader Yuma Ma, and I have come to deliver punishment onto the worms who call themselves Minas Mar. The sect leader of the Silk River sect spoke righteously. His voice was projected by his spiritual power, so it would reach everyone below. Yes, this was the first step. Sect leader Ma would crush their guardian beast in front of their eyes, crushing their morale right from the start. Then the barrier would fall and the fleet of cultivators would descend in a rain of slaughter. There was no way the forces of Minas Mar would be able to face the sect alliance, with the protector gone. Silence fell over the city below. In the stadium, people were staring at the screens in shock and interest. It seemed that there was someone with quite a grudge against Minas March. Would Python appear again and smash them, like it did the demon? Yuma Ma glared at the city, his fists clenched as he didn't get an answer. Where was this impertinent reptile? The silence was disrupted by the disharmonic sound of someone clearing his throat. It was a coughing and retching that raised the hair in one's nape. Who was strangling a sick cat? Dum Ting thought, having a weirdly accurate idea of how that was supposed to sound. All eyes fell on the Tower Master, who was still leisurely standing in the center of the arena, together with the top 4 participants of the tournament. It was he who had audibly, goosebump-inducingly, cleared his throat to answer. It's good that you human wastes came here of your own volition. I hate leaving the house to take out the trash like you. You know, I have my own list I wish to punish you for. He spoke out, obviously seeing no need to introduce himself, as he took out a stack of papers. Dumting's face folded in hatred when he saw that the Tower Master didn't seem disturbed in the least, but he even had the gall to start rattling down a list of charges against the sect alliance and its members. He not only spoke about their actions in Y City, which included the kidnapping and deportation of children and adults as cultivation resources or disciples. The fiendish sect's actions in Delta, including drug poisoning, drug distribution, and murder to turn people into pills were also included. The Tower Master even mentioned misdeeds they had allegedly committed in the Xiguang province, ranging from theft, blackmail, and robbery, to murder and rape the Silk River sect had committed. "That's enough," the immortal bellowed. However, the voice amplified by the many loudspeakers in the Pythian village merrily went on to reveal more of the misdeeds of their more fiendish allies, like genocide of commoners, and slave trade. There were people in the audience that seemed shocked the Silk River sect would fall as low as to conspire and associate with such scum. Dumting cowered away, taking some distance from the sect leader, who was slowly releasing a dangerous aura. The snake had yet to appear, but Yuma Ma looked ready to jump into the fight, and if it was just to silence the Tower Master and his preposterous speech. It was no different for the cultivators on other ships and those in the air. The speech was irrationally aggravating to anyone whose sect was mentioned. Dumting, on the other hand, couldn't help but question where Minas Mar even got this information. Did they have allies on the continent? Or did they send spies? He didn't doubt the information, the reactions were quite clear on that part. He was just curious how these backwater bumpkins had managed to find out so much about the inner workings of the Xiguang province. Even a normal sect wouldn't know this much without a good amount of digging and investments. The sect master of the Silk River sect clicked his tongue. That Tower Master is a feisty one. The snake still has not appeared. Are they just buying time, or is it really not coming? He mumbled. Despite grinding his teeth, he had not lost his rationality. His role was to take down the snake before they went on the offensive. Fine, I will go down and attack the city, to lure out the beast. Wait with the signal until I'm done. He gave instructions using soundless transmission before he pulled out his weapon. The Silk River Millennium Ice Saber glinted in the light of the sunset. You have a loud mouth. So face me, the immortal pressed out and jumped from the barge. Surrounded by a stream of indomitable chi, he fell to the ground like a meteor. The earth shattered under his feet, leaving a massive crater in the mountain plateau. He landed in pose and didn't wait for even a moment to wield the massive saber in his hand. The swing alone created a frost nova around him, that froze up part of the plain and the buildings on the outskirts of the Pythian village. Yuma Ma didn't shout the name of a technique, it was a simple swing of his weapon that caused a wave of misty air and frost to shoot toward the city. Wherever it passed, it left a thick layer of ice, even on snow. The attack that seemed powerful enough to turn people on the street into ice sculptures, surged against the barrier covering the village. The wave of frost splashed against the magical dome and created walls of ice, easily 20 stories in height. The whole scene was visible on the screen in the arena, prompting an impressed "oh" from the crowd. It was an impressively large-scale attack, not accompanied by any chanting or techniques, leaving an impact on both players and cultivators alike. Dumting couldn't help but be impressed, too. This was the fusion of a heaven-grade weapon and peak blade mastery. However, his breath stalked and his heart raced when there was a sudden change in the terrain surrounding Yuma Ma. This could only mean one thing. The earth below the immortal's feet started moving like liquid, as a massive maw surfaced to swallow him alive. Finally, the snake had appeared. The plan could finally continue. He was not worried about the immortal, vanishing in the gullet of the beast. He was just excited, that he could finally join the battle below.